a symptomatically very successful book by Colin Crouch, published a few years ago, has the title Post-Democracy. He describes in this little booklet, again coming out in a series that is tied to British social liberalism, to repeat it a last time, what he describes is a situation that is defined by a sense of powerlessness, cynicism, apathy, and very poor information on the part of growing parts of the population. We know that voter turnout, a favorite measure by political scientists, used by political scientists, is declining everywhere, without a single exception in the OECD world. What is less well known is that the lower your socioeconomic status, the more you are in the risk camp rather than the opportunity camp. It is way steeper, the decline, than in the middle class. Precarious people do not vote. And they do not have the time to acquire, and they do not have the education, perhaps, to acquire necessary information and to engage in such deliberative processes. Also, they do not have to hope very much from government. They have learned to be, to wait for the government is like waiting on the wrong platform. I remember the times in the late 60s, early 70s in Germany, when the term reform was the key word for hopes, for fair solutions, for the state being able to turn things to the better. Today, if you hear the term reform, you tend to run for cover. What we also, secondly, need liberated time for is family life. As a rule, the precariat does not have children, or at best one. That applies to Europe, not so much to the United States. Okay, as a result, we have this huge and growing demographic gap, and that leads to the formation of a new kind of reform policies, very expensive in budgetary terms, which are policies in order to incentivize parenthood. Growing parts of the public budget are spent on wage replacement for parents. It is not known the production function of this spending is unknown, and literally thousands of experts work on this in order to find out, because you have the cases where no such expenditures are made and fertility is still relatively high, and you have cases like Germany where lots of money approaching 3% of GDP are spent for these purposes without having any effect upon fertility, at least so far. So these policies are very ineffective, and they also involve a highly regressive pattern of distribution. Recent reforms in Germany have resulted, in effect, with the full consent of the Social Democrats, incidentally, that you pay the middle class for having quality children. Not, as was the case until recently, you pay everyone with a bonus to the lower class, which are now being suspected for breeding problem children. As a consequence of the demographic gap, aging societies need migration in order to fill this gap. The Social Democratic Chancellor in Germany, famous Gerhard Schröder, in office until 2005, made a particularly tasteful remark on this, which guided migration policy since that time. There are two kinds of migrants, he says. One type of migrants are those who need us, and another type of migrants are those whom we need. So that's, in a nutshell, is the background philosophy of migration policies. The emphasis is on quality migrants. In April, I remember very well, this year, a colleague at Harvard mentioned in passing the term eugenic migration. And I thought this is really exaggerated, this implicit polemic. 3 days ago, I read in German newspapers that the Christian democratic policymakers in this field have recommended that every migrant should undergo an intelligence test, IQ test, right? So things are clearly moving in that direction. And what is the answer? What is a fair answer to this? One thing is certainly that we should concentrate on overcoming one serious effect of our educational system. Our educational system, and that applies to many European countries, is not able to solve integration problems, beginning with the teaching of the local language. Perhaps one could even consider as a condition for the otherwise unconditional basic income, apart from, and that addresses Philippe's question, apart from permanent residence rights, a successful process of language acquisition, because language decides upon the future of persons and their offspring. You know, if you talk at home a language that no one else understands, you cannot associate with other migrants, and you also create a serious handicap for your children at school. But we also, I think these are all aspects of what we need time for, and time liberated through basic income. What I also want to suggest in conclusion is that we should reopen the question of basic income versus basic capital. Basic capital is something that in one version, as proposed by Bruce Ackerman, provides for a tax-financed amount of 60,000 euro for every 18-year-old graduate of secondary education. And he or she can do with it whatever is preferred. However, an extensive process of financial education will have to precede this. We have done a little calculation for how much that would cost.